Tonight, the gloves are off in the war on drugs. Detecting the dealers.
He just stuck a drill through the back and identified just over 10 kilos of heroin.
And the growers.
The largest ever seizure of dried cannabis.
As the stakes are raised by methamphetamine.
They become very paranoid.
Like it or not, the demand for dangerous drugs never slows. And the drug dealers never sleep. While the drug of choice changes over time, the demand for getting high does not. Every time a new drug appears on the scene, police detectives must find new ways to stop the rot.
We're amongst the highest users, say, for methamphetamine in the world.
They're definitely more violent.
Daily we see victims from drugs in one way or another.
Cannabis has many names, but the saying, growing like a weed, has never been more appropriate than in 1997 when detectives first heard whispers of the mother lode.
I got a call from a detective in Whangarei who sort of said this question. Said, I've been told of a massive cannabis growing operation in the middle of the Whanganui National Park.
Dave Kirby was working in Whanganui at the time of the investigation dubbed Operation Ragwort.
At around a similar time, I had a pilot contact me and say, I was flying over the Whanganui National Park and I saw the biggest cannabis growing operation that I've ever seen. If you were to find a place that is the furthest from any road end, they were pretty close to there.
Mike Hill soon joined the team of detectives gathering information on the dope plantation with help from the Air Force.
Yeah, Skyhawks flew over the plots using the cameras that they had and allowing us with those photographs to get an idea of the dimensions and the heights of the cannabis plants. We knew that at some stage we would have to seize the cannabis and confront what we knew would be armed offenders.
A reconnaissance unit from the elite and heavily armed Special Tactics Group went bush to search out the camp of men thought to be living on the huge plot. After tracking several days through thick forest to get as close as safely possible, the STG team actually crossed paths with their targets.
Oi! How you going? Who are you?
We're from the army up here on the training exercise.
Our police staff had a cover story. We were a bit confused.
You wouldn't happen to know where River Valley is, would you?
Yeah,
So
mate.
they pointed us in the right direction
Right down there.
and the police staff came out.
Right, we better crack on then. Get your left.
The problem was we didn't know whether they'd brought our story. And it turned out that they actually rang the army and asked them, do you have any army men doing any exercises in the national park? And obviously the response at that stage was, no, we don't know that we're aware of. So we found out later, they've all flown out of the plots.
As luck would have it, the police had already planned with the army to be based in Waihuru when they raided the dope plots. So detectives got the army to make a phone call back, saying there were, in fact, soldiers in the bush on an exercise.
Yeah, g'day, mate. It's Dave here in Waihuru.
I was actually the SAS, and yeah, we didn't know about it because they don't tell us what they're doing.
Yeah.
The guys are very, very embarrassed. They've lost some points during the exercise and you're trying to keep that pretty quiet. What we were then able to monitor was that following that conversation, our offenders felt safe, it wasn't the police, moved back in and carried on the cultivation.
Hey, give her a feed.
For the first time ever, the full force of the Special Tactics Group was sent into the field. Stealth was vital as members tracked through the bush for days, quietly surrounding the camp. 4 men were heavily armed but heavily outnumbered and caught totally by surprise. No chance to fight back. And only now could police start examining the extraordinary scene.
Electrified fence, well set up, insulators. And this brings us into plot 4. And you can see the size of the cannabis plantation and the maturity of the plants. Very healthy plants. Okay, here we are back at the drying room, or one of the drying rooms. It's a 13 metre by 6 metre structure. The wires are set up here to dry the cannabis plants and for stripping. And you can see the stripped cannabis plants down here. There's a large pile of them.
And then they built netting shelving through these drying sheds with gas blowers in there that were drying the cannabis, and they had 2 sheds of this sort of size.
In fact, they couldn't keep up with the cannabis that they were harvesting, and some of it was rotten. They had solar power, water pumps to pump water.
You see the generator system that they've got set up there, and the electric cords that are running up to the offenders' campsite obviously to run their TV and video and other equipment they've got there.
There was so much gear at the camp, the growers had used a mate's helicopter to fly it all in.
An array of tools, chainsaws, cutting equipment, batteries set up here. There's battery chargers, spray equipment here for spraying the plants. There's a kitchen area, cell phone.
And we had 2 Iroquois helicopters flying 5 or 6 days, then getting all the stuff out with cannabis, not just the cannabis, but all the equipment and the extras that were in there.
We still pulled another nearly 5,000 cannabis plants, many up to 2 metres tall, out of the ground. Some of the plots were up to 200 metres long, and we seized 600 kilograms of dried cannabis, which is the largest ever seizure of dried cannabis ever in New Zealand.
The 3 men were remanded in custody after changing their pleas to guilty.
Well, obviously we're relieved it's the end of 3 years' hard work from a team of police officers. We're relieved that it's finally over and that it's ended this way.
The criminal gang called themselves the FTWs, claiming that it stood for their motto, "Free the weed."
But unfortunately on their insignia had FTW, but the word world tattooed across the head of the skull.
Operation Ragwort would mark the beginning of the end of the vast outdoor plantations as indoor cannabis growing began to take off. Much harder for detectives to spot a plantation from the air when it's hidden indoors.
It used to be bush-grown cannabis and sold in bullets in that fashion, but more and more because it's the success of our helicopter eradication programs, flying above the bush and destroying the crops from above. It's gone indoors, and there's a lot of hydroponic growing of cannabis.
Instead of the growing season that you used to have between October and April, the crops that they'd harvest once a year, you can now grow cannabis every single day of the year in an environment that is contained. You've got pest-free, it's got the correct amount of CO2, it's got the right light, and they're getting good quality cannabis as a result, and big money too.
One such setup was found at the Auckland factory of clothing label Insidious Fix, till high-flying label owner Jason Crawford was busted by police. Auckland clothing label Insidious Fix enjoyed a high profile on the fashion runways, till Jason Crawford's clothing factory was visited by drug squad detectives.
A friendly neighbour could smell cannabis and thought there was some odd goings on because we couldn't find our way into this building. We asked if we could kick a hole in his wall. He kindly said we could, so we kicked a small hole in his jib board, and when we shone a torch through, we could see a massive cannabis growing operation in this building. Probably the most sophisticated cannabis growing setup I've seen indoors in my career.
The setup was accessed by secret tunnels carefully hidden behind false walls.
It took the jury only 3 hours to decide Jason Crawford was guilty on all 12 charges.
Crawford was sentenced to 6 years in prison. The drug growers' methods may have changed over time, but the tactics that detectives use to catch them are tried and true. They wait, they watch, and they listen.
In 1978, the amendments to the Misuse of Drugs Act allowed the police to apply to the High Court for a warrant to intercept private communications. And this is a huge step forward because prior to that, that sort of evidence was never admissible in any court in New Zealand. And I was part of an investigation team that got the very first interception warrant, and we had the technicians install these listening devices in the house, and we had to have our listening devices within 50 yards of this house. So we rented a house down the road, and of course the local villain, he knew a lot of policemen, so you couldn't just come and go at will. So at 3 a.m. in the morning, we used to swap shifts. So we'd go to the house, walk up the street, quietly let ourselves in. The other guys would leave, and by the time they had been dropped off, it was sort of 5:30 in the morning. So it made for a pretty long shift of somewhere in the vicinity of about 28 to 30 hours, of which you were awake the whole time and listening to, a lot of the time, people snoring and doing nothing. But all of the conversations were recorded.
We talk about interception warrants. Obviously, someone's got to do the legwork and you've got to listen to the conversation. So I was what we called a monitor. So I was the one who listened for 12-hour shifts and typed what I heard and what needed to be listened to again and what was evidential.
Catherine McEvedy honed her typing skills over 4 months on the rural West Coast, working a wiretap on a cocaine importation.
It's very hard to operate undetected in a small country town, as I'm sure you can imagine. Our cover story is we were soil scientists with the DSIR. We were in a caravan parked up, and I think it was summertime because we used to go surfing in our downtime. We had our wee desk with our wee computer and we'd just type away and listen and wish we were out in the sun because it was a beautiful day. They'd sleep in, they'd probably get up about 9 or 10. And the first thing they'd do was turn the stereo up and they'd play it really loud. So the difficulty was it was a little shack. It was really a batch, so every time it rained, it was a tin roof, and the rain just tipped down, so you couldn't hear a single thing. So it made the job quite hard. We found out through the course of the operation that he owned this block of dirt, and we couldn't track him. We couldn't keep him in sight, so you couldn't see where he went on this property, but we know he wasn't gone for long, so we sort of had a rough idea how much searching we'd have to do, and we were really lucky on the day of termination that one of our cops went in there and was scuffing around going, and then kicked his foot on the ground and hit something, and we started digging and we found an ammunition tin. Which was full of cocaine. So we had our product, we had our man, and we had enough evidential to put him away.
It used to be, landline telephones that you'd intercept, but now no one talks on a landline telephone. Cell phones are still around, but now you have Skype, you've got encrypted emails. Just the technology where drug dealers and suppliers can communicate's changed.
The technology now allows us to beam conversations a considerable distance. And of course, the ability to decipher what has been recorded is improved significantly now.
Gone are the days where we do a wire job and you listen to English conversations. I mean, a lot of the majority now are all in foreign dialects. They're in either Cantonese, Mandarin, they're in Farsi. They have been in Spanish. There is Igbo, I think, a West African dialect. So we have interpreters from all different walks of life and nationalities that are coming and doing our interpretation for us. So it's really a game between our techos and the abilities of the criminal and what's around there to work out, what is available, what can we use, and if they are using this sort of type of medium, how do we intercept it?
How we make entry and what we do in order to install listening devices is for me to know, and hopefully you'll never find out.
A successful drug bust takes a lot of careful planning, but a lucky break doesn't hurt either, as Greg Williams recalls from a bust early in his career.
LSD was coming out as just plain blue squares, and we knew there was sort of a link to one of the Wellington gangs, but we didn't quite know who was bringing it in. And we ran this electronic job on a senior patch member, and I was a transcriber on that job. One Tuesday morning, out of the blue, this guy wanders on, knocks on the door, comes in, American accent, and he was the importer.
Greg listened to the American importer boasting. He said he'd been active for 20 years and now had a major client base that he was supplying, and even how he was smuggling the LSD into New Zealand, disguised as plain blue paper. The drugs, he said, were in a leather folder in his hotel room.
Unfortunately, the gang member was away. He was down the South Island trying to buy a Harley, so he arranged with this woman to do the swap over of money and the drugs. And the place he picked to do it was the park right in front of the drug squad. And sure enough, he meets her at the appointed time right in front of us. And the money gets exchanged. I just sat there watching it. I didn't even have to get out of my seat. Then she gets grabbed and he gets grabbed. And of course he's thinking, you know, we don't know anything. Because he just didn't look like anything either. He's a balding sort of guy in his mid-40s. And we went to execute the warrant in his unit.
Sure enough, detectives found the leather folder in the unit with 10,000 tabs of LSD hidden inside.
Again, he didn't think anything of it until we sat him down and played the tape to him, and I can still remember this day his jugular sort of just going when he realised what had happened.
Drug dealers are always coming up with new ways to smuggle drugs into the country, and detectives have to be just as clever at finding them. Right from the early days of heroin importing, drug dealers have constantly dreamed up clever ways to smuggle drugs into the country. The challenge for detectives like Ted Cox is to stay one step ahead.
There was some very cheap heroin seemed to be coming onto the street, and Miles, who had been involved in importation of major drugs in the past, was the importer. Miles arrived at Berry's place one day carrying these shoes, and we had a lovely picture of them with these Adidas shoes. When Miles was followed away from that address, he eventually dropped some rubbish off in a rubbish bin at a nearby shopping centre. And the guys who were actually following him recovered that rubbish, opened it up, and lo and behold, here's a pair of running shoes that had been ripped apart. And because we're fairly smart, of course, we realised that this was the importation method.
Detectives busting the drug ring days later immediately found proof of the importation method at the Crims hideout.
We went to the motel and we found one of these bags. There was a perfect imprint on the bag of heroin that was the Adidas with the emblem and the shoe size and everything, so it had actually been worn in, totally compressed, almost like a fingerprint.
And it's still a method tried on by Crims today. 10 Malaysian drug couriers were stopped at Auckland Airport in early 2011 with some $10 million worth of pure methamphetamine hidden in their shoes.
They had things like itineraries that were in English, but they didn't speak English, and they really couldn't purport to be in New Zealand for legitimate reasons.
Creating closer relationships with foreign border agencies has also proved fruitful for detectives.
Some pitches, or we'd call them pitches, they got taken into a DHL company over in Bangkok. The freighting for them to go to New Zealand was something like the equivalent of 400 New Zealand dollars, whereas looking at the paintings or the pictures as they were, you'd be lucky to get $5 from a flea market. So the DHL officer at that stage over there thought it was a bit suspicious, and they were like a resin painting. They were approximately 2 to 3 inches thick. And so he just got a drill bit out after the person had dropped them off and just stuck a drill through the back of one of them. And as a result of that, identified what appeared to be white powder compacted on the inside. As it ultimately turned out it was just over 10 kilos of 80% pure heroin. It was coming to New Zealand. We had a police and customs liaison officer based over in Bangkok around that area. So, in conjunction with the policeman that was over there at the time, organised what we call a controlled delivery of those drugs, and then we apprehended them in a postal place in Auckland.
For Crims dealing on a larger scale, importing drugs through the postal service just won't cut it. Career criminal Terry Brown was running a huge ecstasy business.
Brown was a criminal that's been around back in the days when my dad was a cop. He always had a notorious reputation. He was always assaulting police and assaulting other people. From our inquiries, it showed that he was importing it through granite-type items, statues, granite columns, that sort of thing.
John's team discovered the ecstasy pills were being hidden in the hollowed-out granite and shipped from Eastern Europe to Brown's fake importing company in Auckland.
It was really just a storage or warehouse area. When we went in late one night, there was no business documentation, nothing there at all. It was just simply a front.
But Brown was pulling in such large volumes of cash, it caused a major headache. His suppliers had to be paid in euros, but exchanging huge piles of Kiwi cash could easily give the game away. So Brown had 2 Lithuanian men come out to New Zealand and wire the money overseas in smaller amounts.
We were aware that they were coming because we'd heard it over the wire that they were arriving, so we had surveillance on them. They were here for approximately 2 weeks, and during that time they were going to different companies, money exchange companies, and sending money out overseas. At that stage, it becomes a delicate sort of, I guess, part of the investigation, whether you show your hand and terminate at that point, or do you allow the money to go out overseas. So effectively, we decided we would let the money go overseas, and they would have sent probably $800,000 over. When they left, we did a covert search on their baggage, and they had the equivalent of 330,000 New Zealand dollars in their bag, which we took off them without them knowing. We didn't get them back off the plane. We simply took the money out of their bags, repackaged it, and sent them on their way. It turned out that through the intercepted communications, they thought they'd been ripped off by baggage handlers. And it was at that time that we thought, well, we can't let any more money go. We've got enough evidence now to charge him.
John Souter's team paid Terry Brown an early morning visit.
We kicked his door in. He got a bit of a fright. He was sort of running around half naked and got jumped on.
Both hands on the back! Do it now!
He was outwardly showing signs of large amounts of money. He had a Porsche 911 that he'd purchased for $275,000 cash. He had a 7 Series BMW he'd bought for $185,000 cash. Another 5 Series Beamer. Effectively, when we did the final termination phase, we see 6 cars that he'd purchased in the space of a year and a half and paid $690,000 cash for them. So that's not something you'd expect from a sickness benefit.
Terry Brown had cash all over town. Police found just one safety deposit box was stuffed with a couple of $100,000. In his nightclub safe, another $60K.
Some at his associate's address, some at his own address, but in total it was $930,000 recovered. A lot of money. In the end, Brown pleaded guilty to all charges that he faced, and he was ultimately sentenced, I think, to 11 years imprisonment.
With such big money being made by drug dealers, detectives needed new tools to hit them in the pocket and cripple their business. New legislation came into effect in 1992, allowing the Crown to confiscate their ill-gotten gains.
This one came up that someone in Ashburton was selling vast quantities of cannabis, and it wasn't your traditional criminal, it wasn't your traditional drug dealer, and it was slightly unusual enough to think, well, this sounds a bit bizarre, we probably need to give it a further look.
This was a situation where a farmer was producing quite large amounts of cannabis and had been for a while.
I think it was a 200-acre farm, so I organised 50 staff, which really only in those days happened for undercover terminations, you know, to take that quantity of staff. I remember my boss saying to me in the car, "You better be right, mate. Look, you've got 50 staff. You better get this one right." I remember thinking there, please, God, please, let there be the evidence. We knocked on his door and he bolted the back door, and luckily we had guys at the back door to intercept, but he had a loaded gun at the back door. He just freaked out.
I was there when they asked him, you know, did he have any cannabis on the premise, and he said that he just had a bit of Percy in the garage, which is a term for, you know, just personal use stuff, you know, a small amount. So I remember we walked out to the garage and opened the garage door up.
It was just everywhere.
There was these big wooden hoppers there full of cannabis, as were these wool sacks behind it.
There were seeds, they just kept finding more and more and more.
And as all good farmers should do, when he got a particularly good plant, he had kept it and labelled it with dates on them, going right back to 1988. And they were obviously good cannabis plants and they had produced good seeds because he was obviously trying to improve the quality of his cannabis.
Catherine's team found $31,000 cash in the bedroom and a bewildering array of antiques.
He had antiques for Africa that he clearly bought at antique auctions that still had their labels on it. And what he was trying to do here is, you can imagine, he's generating a lot of cash. Now, as a farmer, you don't actually generate much cash. I think we found in 1 year he generated $80 in selling lambskins from cash. So the same year he spent something like $200,000 in cash.
I was into my wine at the time, and there were bottles of Bordeaux. I mean, you know, and I remember talking to him on the way back to Christchurch when we took him back to arrest him. I said to him, you know, what's your favourite type of wine? And he said, Mullathurgau. I thought, oh, you've got bottles of first growth Bordeaux there, and you're telling me you like Mullathurgau. So I knew really it was a way of hiding the money.
Sorted silverware.
The new proceeds of crime laws meant the Crown could confiscate assets that were proved to come from drug dealing. This farmer had receipts and records showing his cannabis growing stretched back years.
I mean, it's like he almost looked at the Proceeds of Crime Act and decided, how best can I do it to ensure that I can have all these things taken? Because that's what he did. Banana boxes full of receipts, and quite amazing. We were able to show to the judge that he was earning about $80,000 to $100,000 a year from cash that we could show, which was cannabis dealings.
It was enough to earn him a $400,000 fine and lose him the farm that had been in the family for generations.
He served 4 years jail, and after he finished that, he went to the West Coast and tried to cultivate cannabis there and was caught again, and in fact was caught with a boat coming back from his plot, and so his boat and his car were seized subsequently too. So I don't think he learned his lesson.
Cannabis had made and lost this farmer a lot of money. But a new drug was on the way to keep detectives busy. There's one drug above all others that New Zealand detectives fear the most. And it's not just the cooking and dealing in methamphetamine, but the associated crime and violence. But the scale of the meth trade today was forecast more than 10 years ago when Detective Inspector Harry Quinn warned the police commissioner of a new drug coming our way.
About 1996, some Australian detectives on an interchange with New Zealand came and briefed me as the head of the NDIB, the National Drug Intelligence Bureau. And they talked about their concerns about what was likely to happen as a consequence of they'd discovered a lot of methamphetamine laboratories in the outback of Queensland. And almost invariably, the cook was a New Zealander. He had been sentenced to prison in Australia, and when he finishes his prison sentence, he was going to be deported. So they said, you're going to get a whole lot of criminals coming back to New Zealand under deportation, and they'll be looking to cook methamphetamine. And I wrote this report that suggested that by the year 2002 we would have discovered over 200 clandestine laboratories in New Zealand. And in that year, 1998, I think we'd only discovered 7 in that entire year. And some of the senior members of police scoffed at me and said, you know, this was an exaggeration. But it actually proved to be pretty prophetic, because I think by 2001 we'd found over 200 laboratories in that year.
Detective Senior Sergeant Dave Nimmo worked on Operation Flower, targeting career criminal turned methamphetamine dealer Waha Saifiti.
Saifiti's practically a pensioner now, but he was well known when I joined the police. He seemed to have his finger in all sorts of pies. Where there was an armed robbery in town, his name came up.
But Saifiti had found a new way to earn a living. Detectives with an interception warrant heard him bragging about it.
You're not rolling up the bank. And I said, no money. And then he was too out of selling amphetamines for a living. People didn't want him standing outside the primary school selling it. You're concerned, for sure.
Well, the information was that he was active in the meth manufacturing scene. I mean, it's easy money, so every criminal with a pinch of salt is trying to be involved or is involved.
Police set up an operation to bring down the ruthless meth syndicate.
With Operation Flower, Waha led the team to Bird Hines, senior patch headhunter member in Auckland, and also to a chap by the name of Donut, or Brett Lionel Allison. And as the operation progressed, it became evident that Donut was the cook, and by all accounts quite a successful one too.
Detectives on surveillance followed Saifiti one night to a factory in East Tamaki, where several of the group were manufacturing. whole crew were caught, except the meth cook himself.
Brett Allison, or Donut, wasn't scooped up in the net. He was then on the run because he was aware that police were looking for him. And approximately 2 months later, some information came to hand where Donut might be hiding, and we found him hiding in the basement of a Kelston mechanics shop, manufacturing in there with highly caustic ingredients. Once he got wind the police were outside, there's 2 large Bailey bins, which were several thousand litres of caustic liquid. He began pouring down the drain.
The factory was on a busy intersection and there was a school nearby. Fearing the worst if the poison spread, police cordoned off the whole area while negotiating with Allison to come out. Knowing the game was up, he finally surrendered.
He was covered in sores, and he was actually quite a sick man at the time.
Brett Allison, the cook, was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Waha Saifiti, the ringleader, 9.5. And William Hines, Saifiti's sidekick, received a 7-year stretch. Methamphetamine is not just dangerous for the end user. Detectives constantly see the carnage caused by cooking and consuming the drugs.
The injured man suffered severe burns to most of his body when the backyard chemistry backfired. Concerned neighbours had questions about threats to their own health today. None had any idea a toxic drug lab was right next door.
I don't see drugs as a victimless crime. If a user gets a habit, and plenty of them do, then they've got to fund their habit. And if you've got let's take a little bit extreme, but $1,000 a week habit, and there's plenty of examples of that, of methamphetamine, where are they going to fund that from? So it'll start off probably slow and borrowing, and then it'll start off from fraud or theft, and the people they're affecting is generally their family members, their friends, close associates. Sometimes the money can be taken from work funds.
You're going to be on the street selling your body, or you're going to be committing crime to get that money. You just can't do it any other way.
You get to a certain habit per week, and then you're finding struggling to fund that habit. So it can turn a basic user into a low-level dealer.
Naturally, we see the low-life street sort of junkies and that sort of type of thing. But you also see people that are involved in high business type areas. It seems to be a drug that is used in all walks of life. A lot of the people that I've dealt with in the past, they are on the bones of their arse. They've lost houses, they've lost businesses. It's quite a destructive drug, and it's really destroyed some lives.
Playing for the high stakes on offer in the drug underworld is proving attractive to people from the most unlikely quarters.
David Shader was export manager for a placemat company. So he had legitimate reasons to travel in and out of the country on a regular basis, and when he got back, he was just brought into the customs search area, and then we did a search, and located in one of the carry-on bags that he had was 2 kilos of methamphetamine. So, a couple of $1 million worth of drugs just sitting in his bag that he'd carried through the airport with him.
On the outside, David Shader and Theodore Graf portrayed an image of respectability and privilege. But underneath, they were drug smugglers, propping up their lifestyle by bringing methamphetamine into New Zealand, almost $10 million worth.
He was making over $100,000 a year in his business that he was working for. He was mixing with people that you'd say would be reasonably high profile. He was really just your general businessman type of person, no one you'd expect to get involved in drugs.
Shader pleaded guilty and received a 6-year prison sentence. But he hasn't been the only respectable citizen to fall foul of the law while chasing the big money. The lure of easy money is a powerful one, even for people who might otherwise never mingle with the drug underworld. Manufacturing meth requires access to specific chemicals, but some are commonly found in some flu remedies.
Telfast tablets are sold at pharmacies in New Zealand, but they were a popular cold and fluorimeter that were being purchased to manufacture methamphetamine, they had 120 milligram content of pseudoephedrine. So that was one of the higher tablets around at that time that had that sort of quantity of pseudoephedrine in it. So you'd get a box that you'd purchase from a pharmacy for around $20 for 10 tablets, and that could sell on the black market for $150 a box. So there was good money being made. A landlord who was renting an apartment out, he thought it was supposed to be vacant, and he'd gone to do some tidy up of it, and as a result he'd opened the door and found that there was about 1,800 boxes of Telfast stacked up in one of the bedrooms, $140,000 in cash, and a little bit of cannabis in a 2-litre pack. Ended up locking up two Asian gentlemen, young Asian gentlemen in their 20s, that came there that night and unlocked the door, and they were arrested and charged with possession of those particular tablets. From having a look at those cartons of Telfast tablets, we managed to identify where they'd been distributed out of. In our inquiries, it led us to find that this Dr. Chen was a cardiac thoracic surgeon. He was working at Auckland Hospital at the time, was well thought of, but over the space of since October 2003 through to about July of 2004, he had uplifted 20,000 packets of these Telfast tablets, and some of those are the ones that were found in the apartment. So as a result of that information, we carried out a bit of a sting operation on him.
Police staked out the warehouse from where Chen was uplifting the pills. Late one afternoon, their target fronted in a rented van and picked up 2,000 packets of Telfast. Police tailed him through the Auckland traffic.
He ended up driving all the way from West Auckland into town, parked on some double yellow lines, and lo and behold, one of the Asian gentlemen that had been arrested in the apartment fronted up. He was actually on bail at that time. Fronted up, Dr. Chen got out of the car, walked off, and this gentleman jumped in to the van that had the tablets in it and drove off around the corner. He uplifted his other associate that had been arrested in the apartment as well, and they ended up taking the tablets out to an address in Hillsborough, where they progressed to strip them all out of their packets.
Police!
We ended up recovering all the tablets, arresting those three people in the end at that address. Later on that night, Dr. Chen was arrested. When we spoke to him, he stated that he didn't know what pseudoephedrine was used for, as in the manufacture of methamphetamine. Really didn't know much about methamphetamine at that stage, is what he'd said in his interview. He had stated that he was approached by one of these young Asian males who purported to be a representative for Chinese medicine company overseas. That person had said, "Look, can you arrange? You're a well-known person in New Zealand. Can you arrange to get these tablets for us? We're going to export them back overseas to the Chinese Hubei Medicine Company." He was supplied with some documentation from the company, but the company never existed. So over his period of uplifting these tablets, which was on 8 occasions, he uplifted 22,000 packets. And if you work it out that he was getting around $13 for each packet, he would have made around $300,000 in cash.
The Crown painted a picture of a man driven by pure greed, but the jury took less than 10 minutes to disagree.
The difficulty with the offence that he faced in those days was that you needed to show that the person had knowledge that those Telfast tablets were being used in the manufacture of meth, and he was acquitted at trial.
I'm a person is honest to other people, but unfortunately these people is not. They are dishonest and cheated me.
Because we know the milligram strength of a particular tablet, the ESR can provide you with a potential yield based on the milligram content of pseudoephedrine. So from that quantity that he actually uplifted and provided, it would work out to be the equivalent of about 13 kilograms of meth once it's manufactured, which at street level would be around $10 million once it hit the street, if sold in gram weights.
You don't have to be a user or a dealer to run risks from the effects of P.
There has been some evidence of some truck drivers using it to try and get by and work longer hours while they're on the road, and obviously that is of great concern considering the great size of some of those trucks on the road and some of the great distances that they travel. It's about risk and gain the end of the day. You're going to take that risk to gain a few dollars here and there, but the impact on your family, the impact on the community, and the reality is we're waiting to come and get you.
It was a gentleman that lived in Rotorua. He was a truck driver, and he had no form, no criminal history. But, you know, he got to that stage in life where he was looking for something else, got turned on to methamphetamine. He went over to uplift some methamphetamine from a couple over in Tauranga.
Got a pair of 5 debts.
It'll be good. You can get more.
I'll do this, babe.
Okay.
Hey, mate.
Hey. Yeah. Just get it, mate.
The drug dealer was getting the drugs out for him, out of the car, but he mistook it as going to get a gun.
Ricky!
Those parts of the mind that enable us to make informed decisions and proper decisions about our actions just get burnt away by the use of methamphetamine. And he was going to get caught. He obviously didn't think about the fact that he was the last one to talk to them on the phone, text them about picking gear up, that type of thing. They just don't realise those decisions that they've made previously that are affected as a result of their immediate response to a threat or perceived threat. They become very paranoid. It's made our clientele a lot more unpredictable. Firearms seem to be a choice for drug dealers now.
If we kick a door in, we will announce that we're the police, but that person is either waking up from a drug-induced coma or out of sleep or whatever. They not really have their wits about them, so immediately they would be in a panic situation.
It's a lot more dangerous out there now, there's no doubt about that.
One of the low points for me would be losing a mate, Don Wilkinson. That's directly related to the methamphetamine trade.
One of the two people from the dwelling produced a rifle. Both their officers were shot, one fatally.
When Sergeant Don Wilkinson was shot and killed while on a covert drugs operation, it rammed home to the police and the public that this is a dangerous business.
You go out to do a job like this and you're never expecting the ending that we had that night. To see the shock on the faces of the other staff who were involved in that operation, the family, the disbelief, you know, that this could have happened. Just a sobering thought. Just brings it all back to you, the dangers and the risks that are out there and faced by the frontline staff every day.
Next week, policing the gangs.
I thought I'd seen gang violence, but what I saw just took it to a whole new level.
A special type of policing for a special type of criminal.
They would be the most evil people I've ever dealt with.
Bringing law to the lawless.
They are significantly donkey deep in the distribution of methamphetamine.
The bikies, the brawlers, and the big business of crime.